Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg, and I'm your host of Yoga Birth Babies. And today we're going to talk about beyond behaviors, understanding sensory needs and regulation in children. Now, whether you're pregnant or a parent or a friend of a parent, you have probably seen a child have some sort of tantrum or meltdown. Now, I know I have definitely lived through many meltdowns. I have a child with some sensory processing needs or special needs, and I will be the first to admit I didn't always understand what was happening. And it took me some time and some education to better understand that when tantrums and meltdowns are happening, it's not that the child is trying to be quote unquote bad or difficult, it's they are having a difficult moment. And so I thought this is a topic that and a situation that many parents go through. And I thought we should better understand this. We might benefit from understanding what is sensory processing. What's happening when a child's having a meltdown? How are we as parents going to better support that and also learn to regulate ourselves? And then one of my favorite topics we dive into in this podcast is about transitions. I know it's not my best thing getting from one place to the other, and I know kids have a really hard time with this. So I thought this podcast is for those that are raising kids that have big emotions and want some support. So my guest today is Madeha Ayub. She's a pediatric occupational therapist, both in school settings and home health care. She understands the needs to identify and support sensory challenges both in her professional life, but also in her personal life as her own children have unique sensory profiles. She's also the author of the Sensory Support book series to help parents of sensory sensitive children feel safe, child-led tips to help empower their children to explore food textures and clothing textures. Those tend to be kind of the big ones for a lot of kids with sensory issues, and it's a really wonderful book series I encourage you to take a peek at. Now, before we get to my conversation with Madeha, I would love to give you some updates about what's happening at PYC. So really the best way to stay on top of everything is to check out our website and join our newsletter. Each week we go over some fun tips, there's videos, there's the latest podcasts, and on our website we're going to have our in-person and our online and our on-demand class schedule, our workshop schedule, and of course our teacher training schedule. For those that are interested in learning the PYC method, 4 times a year we hold our teacher trainings and support people from all over the world to become PYC teachers. It's really an exciting endeavor that we have going on. I also want to take a moment and thank you because you've taken me seriously when I've said, let me know some topics and guests, and people have done that. They've reached out. They suggested topics that I have either covered or want a new perspective on, or they have a guest that they recommend. And it's been a really great way to help continue to keep the podcast growing and exciting and inspiring. Now, I do have a favor to ask you. Can you please, when you have a moment, leave a rating and review for the podcast. That is going to help people get to know the podcast and have it come into their awareness and help us grow our community. All right, I think that's enough from me. Let's take a quick break. We come back. Please enjoy my conversation. Hi, Madeha. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you.
I'm really excited to chat with you. I heard you on another podcast and immediately I'm like, I need to talk to her. We need to dive into this topic. I think that what you do as pediatric OT is fascinating, and having a child that has some sensory processing issues, I know that sometimes I feel overwhelmed, and I really appreciate that. In the podcast I listened to, you gave some really solid information and tools. So thank you for letting me pick your brain.
My pleasure.
So I guess we should start with, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you and what drew you towards pediatric, I keep wanting to say OT, but I know I should pronounce the whole thing, occupational therapy, because not everyone knows what OT stands for.
Right. So, so I am a pediatric occupational therapist. I also use OT. So, I understand. It's really long. This will be my 10th year working with children and their families. I worked across schools, hospitals. I've done home-based OT. So now I'm a little bit doing both schools and home-based. But what drew me to OT and pediatrics specifically was how deeply this profession focuses on the whole child. So their nervous system, their environment, their emotions, their everyday routines. And I was especially drawn to sensory processing so early on because I kept seeing kids being labeled as difficult or defiant when in reality their bodies just were overwhelmed or undersupported. So I feel like OT gave me a way to support these children without trying to change who they are. And I love that about this job.
Oh, I love that about not trying to change who they are, because I will say, having a child with this, I didn't understand that at first. And I do think I'm like, we need to change some of this. We need to change who he is. And then working with an OT, I think we started with my son 3 or 4 years old. They did give me those ideas of like, no. There's not a problem with him. Like, we just need to help him better regulate and process. So thank you for kind of framing it that way. So I guess we should also go into explaining what sensory processing is and how it shapes children's behavior. And as you said, how it's often misinterpreted.
Absolutely. So sensory processing is basically how our nervous system takes information from the environment. So touch, sound, taste, and even information from our internal body. So how we interpret our body awareness and things like that. And it organizes that information, interprets that information, and then creates this response. So for example, if I hear someone call my name, my body automatically looks towards the sound of, whoever said that. But within a matter of split seconds, my brain actually interpreted that information, made sense of it. Like, this is someone calling your name, probably seeking your attention, and so our brain is processing that information all the time, and then we respond appropriately. So when this process isn't really smooth for our kids with sensory processing challenges, they might be having really big reactions. So someone who taps them, they might just jump because that tap was just so much for them. Or they may not respond at all. It wasn't enough. You're calling their name, you tap them and they just don't respond because it just wasn't strong enough for them. And so I feel like a lot of the times, kids become labeled as they're being too dramatic or they're hyper, when in fact that they just need more input or less input to feel regulated. So when we misinterpret those sensory needs as behavioral problems, we often just give them more demands instead of giving them more support. So I feel like it's so important to understand what is it that they need.
All right. You kind of sparked something in my head. I want to go a little bit deeper. So you said, I'm thinking kind of your typical kid, and maybe there's no typical kid, or maybe I'm just thinking of my kid, that always was described as a little engine that kept going. And you were saying either it needs more input or less. Yes. So for the kids that are a bit hyperactive, is that needing more input? They need to kind of get there. Can you describe that a little? Can you talk about that more?
Yes. So the children who are what we call the sensory seekers, they need more because their brain is under responding to sensory information. So sometimes the brain didn't register that information. So when you for example, that tap, they didn't feel it. But when you give them a really tight, squeezy hug, they'll feel that and they'll love it. And these are the kids, often they're considered clumsy because they'll drop very lightweight items. And they're like, oh, I didn't even notice I dropped it. Or they'll bump into other kids not realizing it because they're just not getting enough. So these are our sensory seekers. They love the crashing. They love biting on things. They love swinging and climbing. So they need more. And then you have the kids that are over responding. That means their brain is just firing every time. They go into a room, the lights are brighter to them than they are to everyone else. The sounds are louder to them than they are to everyone else. And they'll cover their ears. They'll put their head down. They'll just feel very withdrawn. So they need less. So
can you have kids that swing back and forth? Sometimes they get overwhelmed by noise.
Yes.
But then sometimes. Yes.
So that's having a mixed sensory profile. And that is actually probably the most common case, because you can be very sensory seeking in movement, but then very sensory avoiding with sounds. So as like you love to crash, but then you hate it when it gets loud. And so they'll cover their ears. And that's common because each sensory system is being processed differently by the brain. So you really have to look into each sensory system on its own. And so just because your child is seeking movement, that doesn't mean they're seeking taste and seeking sounds and seeking everything else. So you have to look at it separately.
That makes so much sense. Do you feel like this has gotten more, I don't know if popular is the right word, accepted in the last, 10, 15 years than before? Because I feel like in my kids, so my daughter's 11, my son is 14, but I feel like there's so much more accommodation now than I used to see.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot more awareness. I think schools are trying to be a lot more inclusive and mindful, giving a lot more movement breaks now. I don't think it's perfect yet. I think there's still a lot of work because I still hear cases, where it's like, my son doesn't get, he only gets recess like once a month. And it's just like things like that. But in general, I think there's a lot more awareness now. And I think educators are trying to be very mindful of individual sensory needs and not putting everyone in this one profile anymore.
I like that. Yeah, I know, like my daughter, when we go to a movie, she has to have like some sort of something covering her ears because it's too much. And then I know in her classroom, they also have that for some kids. Or I actually appreciate that they're starting to see kids individually. So let's talk a little bit about parents, because I know that I am hyper focused on my kids because I know they have some sensory needs. But what about parents are thinking like, I'm missing something? What are some of the common signs that their kid might be needing sensory support? Because sometimes then the school, if they don't know it's sensory support, then they're labeled,
right,
difficult child, or they're kind of just jumping to conclusions.
Right. I always tell parents, I feel like kids do a very good job at showing what their needs are. So for example, the child who feels like the lights are too bright or the sounds are too loud, they'll cover their ears, they'll like cover their eyes, or they'll have just as soon as you go into a busy environment, they're nervous, they're terrified. And so you can tell, right? They're showing you that. And the child who's very sensory seeking, and like you said, is an engine that does not stop, right? They're constantly moving, they're constantly getting up, and so I feel like kids do show it. But I tell parents, don't observe like the moments, observe the pattern. So it's just because your child hated the texture of slime on this one day, but is it happening throughout like the day? Is it happening like every time they touch something messy, right? So I always tell them, is this happening across settings? And of course, there's always some variation. Like kids sometimes sensory issues show up more in school because like they're out of their comfort zone. And, so there is a little bit of difference there. But in general, if they're sensory seeking at home, they're sensory seeking at school. And if they're sensory avoiding and sensitive at home, they'll show those same sensitivities in school. So observe those patterns.
That makes a lot of sense. So I was scouring your social media in preparation for our conversation. I was then stalking you for a little bit. So
I appreciate it. I don't mind.
So one thing that you seem to do beautifully is you're really compassionate about regulation and not just blame it on behavior. So, and you did speak of this a little bit, but how can parents better understand what's happening in a meltdown or resistance or just these big emotions? And then how can the parent respond without themselves getting all worked up?
Yes. I think that's a really good question. And I always tell parents and this is something that I've trained myself to do as well. It's at that moment when you're seeing a meltdown, instead of saying, how can I stop this behavior? Like, how can I get them to stop? Ask yourself, what is this child trying to communicate to me? What is this behavior communicating? And so at that moment, like to reason with the child doesn't make any sense. Like children are not receptive during a meltdown, and co-regulating is really important. So doing something where you both feel, because oftentimes a meltdown dysregulates a parent too. So like when my child's screaming, I'm super dysregulated. So doing something where you both regulate your nervous system, maybe like a really squeezy tight hug or rocking back and forth, or just taking some deep breaths together. I think.
What if the kid, I've done that. I'm like, okay, let's take a deep breath. My son will be like, no, I am not. So how do you get them on board with that?
Yeah. I mean, deep breaths are hard. Sometimes I cannot do that. Like, let's take a deep breath. It's more like, let's see how big you can blow this bubble. And like, but of course you have to have that on you. But I think also redirecting. So I feel like sometimes, if I see a child who's just banging their head or just like crashing on the floor, just rolling around, just give them that space to do it. Like, I mean, if it's not safe, of course you have to redirect. And I always tell parents, like, have an area of your house where your child can crash. Have an area of your child where your child, and an area in your house where your child is allowed to do these behaviors. Because if a child is seeking height or seeking that crashing input, by saying no, it might actually make it worse. And now they're doing something extremely dangerous. But instead, just redirecting it and saying like, okay, I see that your body is telling me something. You feel like crashing. It's just not safe to crash in the kitchen, but let's move to the area that you can crash, right? So just redirecting instead of stopping it. And I think that helps them too, just giving them that time to do the crashing and stopping and whatever it is that they need to do to get themselves regulated.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to talk about another big issue that I see. I've talked to many parents and transitions. And
yes,
I think this is kind of an ongoing issue for kids that have sensory. Like, I don't know if they outgrow it. So
transitions are tough, even for adults. Yeah. It's hard.
So I know, actually, I find myself that way too. Like, I'll be in bed and I'm like, Deb, you really should go to sleep. I'm like, no, I'm going to watch a few. Like, all transitions can be hard. So what are some simple sensory informed strategies? I love a good strategy.
Yeah. And and when you think about it, transitions, there's a huge sensory component to transitions. Like you're saying, you're in bed, you're in a really warm space. Now you have to get up, wash your face, brush your teeth, put on your clothes, eat your breakfast. Now put on your heavy outerwear. Now go outside into the cold. And we're both in Jersey, so you see how freezing it is here. So I feel like there's so many like sensory triggers in those transitions that are making it really difficult. So there's a huge sensory component, but I always say predictability is huge. Maybe if there's a visual checklist, like this is what we're going to do. Okay, check off. We brushed our teeth, so they know exactly what's expected of them. Even giving them a warning. So I love using timers to let my child know they have 5 or 10 minutes left before we have to like get our backpacks. And the timers where you can see, the time decreasing. I think those are the best ones, but also using heavy work movements between transitions. Now, heavy work, as I was saying, deep pressure, like those squeezes when your child feels very dysregulated, the type of input a deep squeeze can give you, that deep pressure.
So like give them a big hug, like, okay, great. You got your teeth brushed, big hug. Like,
yes. But many kids may not want to be touched, and that's okay. So heavy work are movements that also provides deep pressure actively. So for example, if we're stomping our feet, that's a form of a heavy work movement that is giving deep pressure in the joints. So doing a wall push-up, rolling like a log, or doing an animal walk to the door, like doing frog jumps. So doing heavy work
I kind of love that.
Yeah, perfect. So doing those movements between transitions as you're transitioning, and it can be even like if dinner time is hard for your child, okay, let's do our little crab walks to the dinner table. And so those are great. And I actually have, I don't want to take this time to talk about my poster, but I actually have a poster of heavy work activities that are great for transition. So you can find that on my page as well.
Please talk about, that's great because I'm literally trying to think of ideas. I'm like, okay, do I ask my son to move things that are heavy?
So moving, so moving things. Even like in my poster, I have a child like pushing a cart with their toys in there. So moving anything heavy, carrying something heavy. And when I say heavy, I always for safety reasons, I say 10% of their weight, 10 to 15% of their weight. But as you know, a lot of kids actually, if you probably noticed, they love carrying heavy things because that deep pressure that they're receiving is so regulating to their nervous system. So anything that involves carrying, pushing, pulling, any resistance, those are the heavy work activities. And a lot of OTs use this term a lot. So I just wanted to make sure that I clarified what it means because I'm sure it'll come up again. Heavy work movements.
I love that. And these are the kids that also benefit from the weighted blankets, right?
Yes. Weighted blankets are another great one. I always tell parents, if you do want to use a weighted blanket, use it for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. Give them a break only because oftentimes if you practice, if you're at the gym and you're lifting a 10-pound weight. After a week, that 10-pound weight is not going to feel much. So you're going to go to the 20-pound weight. And then after a week, the 20-pound weight is not going to feel like anything. So after a while, those weighted blankets might not work anymore because now your child wants more. But unfortunately, like there's a limit to how much weight we should give them. So that's why I say like,
so don't let them sleep with it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was doing that wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think once they fall asleep, I think you can remove it. But if they need it to fall asleep, that's fine. But once they're sleeping, I think it's okay to just remove it.
I do love what you said about the timer. One thing that's helped both my kids for taking showers is having a timer. Otherwise, they completely lose track of time and they're in there for like a half an hour. And I'm like, hot water, we need hot water.
Yeah.
But the timer is a great idea. All right. So let's talk about how can parents start to build a more sensory supportive home routine without feeling like they need to overhaul everything at once. I know you mentioned the list. What other thoughts?
So I always say, like, I think the best way to do this is embed sensory strategies into whatever routine you already have going on. I feel like if you make separate time for this, it's not feasible. Parents are busy. I get it. So for example, if you have a child who loves to bite, because that's a pretty common one I see too, where kids are seeking oral sensory input. They love to bite really hard on things. I would say just replace their toothbrush with a vibrating toothbrush. Of course, they're brushing their teeth anyway. You're just replacing it, or give them something really crunchy to eat for breakfast. So that way their like oral needs are met. So you're not adding anything to your day. You're just like giving these little minor tweaks and replacing it. And then if your child is about to have a meltdown because they don't want to go to school, those heavy work activities, like, okay, let's get to the car. Like, which animal are we going to be? Do you want to run like a tiger or like crawl like a crab? Like, which one are we going to do? Or can you like carry this to the car, give them something heavy to carry? So it's not like too much of like an add-on. It's just kind of like with your routine, you're just adding this as you go. So I always feel like start small. Sensory strategies, they don't have to be complicated. They don't have to be expensive. And that's something I always talk about on my page too, like low to no cost sensory strategies, because honestly, like you can do this right at home, doing a wall push-up right before homework, right? Like giving
that was the question I was just going to ask. I was going to ask, how do you get them, if they do need to sit still, so you're saying do something physical before they need to settle down.
If you can have them go outside, like I know whether it can be tough right now, but I think if you can have them go outside before they do their homework, that's great. I think outdoor play beats like an hour of this like heavy work indoors. But if you're indoors, do the heavy work, the wall push-ups and the jumping jacks and the animal crawls and things like that. But then there also are options to add to their chair. Like we have these like TheraBands that often many people exercise with. So sometimes I'll add them to the legs of the chair. So as they're doing their homework, they have something to kick. And that's really helpful. And then sometimes even during dinner time, and then giving them regulating snacks. So kids who just love the deep pressure, those crunchy and chewy textures provides the deep pressure in the jaw. So that's a really good way to regulate them as well.
Okay, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I'm actually going to throw you a question that I didn't actually prepare you for, so you can tell me if it's okay or not. But we're talking a lot about sensory issues, and I'm really curious your thoughts on screens for kids that have sensory process. Because I can imagine, I'm just kind of rolling here, that it could be overstimulating for some, and those that want stimulation, it can actually be almost like addictive. So big topic. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back and talk about that. All right, we'll be right back. Okay, so we are back. I would just love to hear your thoughts about screens with kids with sensory processing issues.
Yeah, so I think this is a tricky one, because I'm not the person who says like no screen time, as controversial as this is. Nor do I say like unlimited screen time. Like for me, like you said, there are some kids that when they come home from school, like they just have such an overwhelming day. Like their nervous system is literally like so overwhelmed that giving them something that's very overstimulating to watch may not help. But they have low stimulating shows as well. So, and you know your child best. Like if you feel like, 20 minutes of screen time will really help them return back to baseline, and that's their time to kind of like reset, then, I think it might be helpful. And there are kids like you're saying who need more. So sometimes giving them that opportunity to engage in visually stimulating screen time can help, especially if it engages the child in movements. Because nowadays they have these like YouTube videos where, you follow along and you follow the movements. And I think that's actually really helpful. So I wouldn't say like a big no, but of course, I think giving them a stop to it too. So it's not like unlimited screen time either. And again, those visual timers are helpful with screen time as well.
Do you think it could be too stimulating that, like, especially the kids that might, like, lack of a better word, like kind of throw it crashing into things, like they crave that weight? Do you think there's something, and I'm again just kind of throwing this out there, do you think there's something about maybe the dopamine hit or the stimulation that they keep wanting more?
Yeah, I mean, that is possible. And like I said, I would always couple it with like the videos that kind of have them get up and move around. But I think if this is something that you're doing right before bedtime, I think that's probably not the best time to do it, because at bedtime, at least an hour before bedtime, that's when you have to kind of wind down. So that's when like the deep pressure and the weighted blanket really helps. So if you're going to give them that screen time at least an hour or two before bedtime, I think that's time to kind of end it. And then just give them a lot of that calming input. And even movements, like as much as like there are movements that can stimulate a child and there's movements that can calm a child. And I think even movements can differ too. For example, if a child, and sometimes I need to stimulate children too. Like if they're in school and they're kind of very like sluggish, I'm like, all right, let's wake up your body. So sometimes spinning in circles can like excite a child. But if a child's already so dysregulated and like crashing and like jumping off the walls, then spinning in circles is probably not for them, because they need to actually calm their bodies down and not excite it even more. So linear movements where they're rocking back and forth or side to side is probably better, like in a swinging motion. So even movements can vary. So knowing how to get your child to move is helpful. And predictable movements, if they're just like freestyle, is, just dance, that excites a child, versus a very predictable routine. Like, okay, we're going to do 4 jumping jacks followed by 5 wall push-ups. That's a more predictable movement routine, and that's more calming. So even with movements, it can vary on, are you like exciting them more or are you winding them down?
That makes a lot of sense. Right? I want to talk a little bit about parents, because we know, and you did allude to this earlier, that if a child's having a meltdown, the parent can't join them or shouldn't join them. So how do parents' own sensory needs and nervous system play into the family dynamic, and how can parents also regulate themselves?
Yeah, and I think that's such a great question. And me, even being an OT, I often forget to kind of fill my sensory cup up first. I feel like I'm always like supporting my kids at work and supporting my own kids with sensory challenges. But I think you should, first of all, be very realistic. Like as much as I want to come home to a bubble bath, of course, that's not realistic. But even if you like take a minute to just step into another room, take a deep breath before you kind of tackle homework with your kids, I think that's so important. Wearing noise reducing headphones. Like sometimes like my kids are playing and of course they get loud enough. As much as I love that sound, it gets a lot at the end of my day. So even having like noise reducing headphones, asking for help and lowering your own expectations, I think that's really important. And sometimes like I have to tell myself, like, even if all I did today was take care of myself, I think I did a lot. And I think we often don't see that as productivity. Like, you didn't do anything today, right? Like you didn't get work done. But I think sometimes like you need to know, like taking care of yourself is probably the best thing that you can do. And we need to kind of shift that mindset. Like that's really important. Like if all you did today was that. So I think let go of that guilt and acknowledge that your nervous system matters too. And kids will definitely feed off of your nervous system.
I think that's so important, especially for parents of kids that are still very much kind of climbing on them, like the touched out, overstimulated and exhausted, like that. I love how you talked about taking care of like that compassionate self-support. I think that is so important, that if we can take care of ourselves, we'll have a little more ability to take care of others. So what are some misconceptions about sensory needs that you wish more parents understood or also could let go of? I think you mentioned expectations. I think I need to do that too.
I think one big misconception is that sensory supports reinforces bad behavior. Like, why are we letting this child who's constantly getting out of their seat, like we should take recess away. right? So I just feel like sometimes when I give a child who's constantly getting up, I'll give them some sensory supports in school. Like here's a movement chair. And they're like, oh, why are you rewarding that behavior? And oftentimes I really have to shift their mindset. Like, no, they're doing that because they have this need for movement. Please don't take their recess away. Please don't.
Like that's the kid that needs that recess
that needs
and to
it,
get
exactly.
all their yayas out. Yeah.
Exactly. And then of course you have the kids that are trying to avoid work. And I mean, that's different, but you'll know when you give these kids the movement that they're seeking, you'll see a change. You'll see them be a lot more calm, a lot more regulated. And sometimes it's not even calm, but they're ready to learn. They may still be fidgety, but they're more focused. And so I really try to shift that mindset. Like it's not reinforcing. It's not even bad behavior. And you're not reinforcing that or making them do it more. So I think that's really important. And I think another big one is that, if I just ignore this, my kids will just grow out of it. I think this is just this age. And I think that's another big one that I try to like shift parents' mindset. Like number one, oftentimes they don't grow out of it, but that's not a bad thing. A child who's constantly crashing on the couch as a 5-year-old may end up being a 30-year-old who loves to go rock climbing on the weekends. And honestly, that's a cool thing. Like as adults, you always praise that colleague of yours that's like doing all this like on the weekends, like, oh my gosh, where do you get all this energy? I wish I had that energy. So as an adult, you almost praise that person.
I was actually going to ask you about that because there is a certain level of, I guess, acceptance that and I remember hearing things like, they'll grow out of it. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if they're all, and I guess some, and I did a little research and you'll know better than me. It seems like some sensory challenges kids do grow out of, but not all. And I, as a parent of someone with a 14-year-old who has sensory issues, it is a big pill to swallow. Like this might be a lifetime challenge. So what are your thoughts about kind of helping the parents accept that? Helping the children. And I love that you said rock climbing because we introduced, my husband's always been a rock climber, but we introduced that to our family about 3 years ago. It has been life-changing because it's energy literally climbing a wall and it's fun. So they all do together.
A bonding experience. Yeah. Exactly. And I think the sensory needs that you say that, some do go away. I don't think sometimes, our sensory needs change because of the certain things are more triggering. So a child might like react more when they're in a triggering environment. As they get older, sometimes they're not as triggered as much. So even as OTs, we don't stop services when the child no longer has the sensory needs. Usually I would graduate a child from OT when they can independently self-regulate. So for example, the child who constantly needs to get up, they've learned that, hey, you know what? I can ask for a movement break. I can ask to take a walk. I can ask for my seat cushion. I can ask, I can advocate for myself. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't think you need me anymore because you're doing a great job. And that's the end goal. The end goal is not to eliminate the sensory needs, but how can I live a meaningful life and help myself when I need to? And so as adults, we do this all the time. Like if you're working and you just need something to help you focus, you might start chewing gum. That's the same way a child will be biting their pencil in school to help them focus, but they're not realizing what's happening here, right? It's that oral input is helping them regulate. But as an adult, we realize like, hey, when I chew gum, it helps me. Let me just take some gum. And, it's so like second nature that we don't realize that we do this. And even when I was like in grad school, like I remember I had certain kind of like habits that when I would be studying, I couldn't sit in a quiet library. Like I needed some sort of like white noise. I needed to pace back and forth. So even if I was in a library, I would have headphones on so I can listen to white noise. And I had to sit near an aisle that I can like pace back and forth between the aisles. So I'm not disturbing anyone because I couldn't just be still. But then as an adult, you learn that works for you. But as kids, they're still learning. So I feel like the end goal is to help them advocate for themselves and learn to independently self-regulate.
Oh,
I love that. That's the best thing that you can help and that's the best thing a parent can help their child with as well.
Oh, that's great information. All right. I want to talk a little bit about your book series, the sensory support book series. All right. Let's talk a little bit about that and what inspired you to create it. How do you hope families hope to use the books in their daily lives? Just share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I was inspired by one of my clients. This is when I was doing mostly home-based OT. So I was working with a client at dinner time who refuses to eat anything outside of Chick-fil-A chicken nuggets. Like he'll have that for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Maybe pasta, but like dry, no sauce, nothing. And he would eat this like day and night, would not eat anything at school. So he would come home super hangry. I don't know that term is, when you're like super hungry, that you're angry. So he would have a meltdown every day because he just wouldn't eat in school. And he would never go to a birthday party because he was terrified of pizza, and every single kid's birthday party has pizza, and he just didn't like how it looked, how it felt. And so I wanted to find a book for him on how to help introduce foods to him in a safe way. And a lot of the books that I feel like that are out there are about like just forcing a child to eat. And at the end of the story, the child miraculously loves the food. And I'm like, that never happens. This is not realistic. And the goal should never be to love the food. For me, the goal is to feel safe around that food, that, hey, I can just be around pizza and not feel like I have to run away, or that pizza just touched my food, but that's okay. And it's that like safety where I'm not always on high alert. I'm not always triggered. And so my books are very child-led. There's no one else really on the pages. The child is doing everything. It's very like feasible strategies, sensory strategies, and it's about empowering that child. It's about helping them feel in control and know that, hey, you're not alone, but this is something that you can do to help yourself. And at the end of the day, like your comfort matters most. And this is how you can advocate for yourself as well. So it's about using your voice, but also having the strategies when you need it. And so my first book was on this. It's called Before the Brave Bite, Empowering Your Sensory Sensitive Child to Explore New Foods. And then the second book was actually just released a couple months ago. It's on clothing textures. So the kids who like hate the tags and the seams and the hats and scarves. And that one is called When Things Feel Icky, Empowering Your Sensory Sensitive Child to Feel Safe in What They Wear. And again, the idea of safety and self-advocacy and empowerment is like the goal here.
Oh, those are so good. And you hit like two of the main topics that I hear so many parents talk about: the food, the textures, the smells, and then the clothes, the seams, the tags.
Yes.
Oh, there's actually one of my friends, her son hates getting his hair cut. Like it's something about, I think also the sensory, but you really hit some of these main ones. Okay, we're going to take another break. When we come back, what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents? And you can share as an OT, you can share as a parent, whatever you want.
Sure.
We'll be right back. Okay, we are back. So what is your one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents?
Yes. So first of all, congratulations. That's really exciting. But I would say follow your instincts. And I know everyone always tells you that, but it really matters. Follow your instincts, trust your instincts, but also always be open to learning and just being flexible. And I always say parents are the experts. Like even me as an OT, I could never do what I do without the parents' insights. Like I always tell them, like, you know your child best. Like, please first tell me about your child. And you don't need all the answers, just a willingness to observe and respond with compassion and adjust as you go. And even with sensory strategies, like that crash area could like work great for a couple months. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, my child is getting bored. Like now what do I do? Or just having that flexibility. Like sometimes sensory strategies can work for a day, a week, a month. And then like now what now, and sensory needs can also change. So maybe it could be that your child was craving at that time and is craving something else now. So just having that flexibility is really important. And I heard this phrase, and I don't know where it originated from, but I always tell myself that your child is not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And that is something that I always tell myself, like when my children are having their meltdowns, as much as I want to just be like, stop, it's just like they are communicating something to me and I am their safety person. I'm the person that they're relying on to get their nervous system back to safety. And so it's really like sensory.
That is powerful. So I'm going to remind myself of that when I have to reframe, oh, they're giving me such a hard time. I'm going to remind myself they're having a hard time and I'm their safety person. Oh my gosh, that is golden. That's like the
I
star.
remind myself all the time. I forget and then I remind myself.
I might have to like put it on a sticky note or like make a sticker and put it on my fridge. I think I need to get creative with that one because I think I need a reminder or tattoo it to myself. So because I think I'm going to need that one for a long time. Where can people find your work?
Sure. Yeah. You can find me on social media. My Instagram handle is Seeds for Special Needs, where I share sensory informed tips for families. And you can find my sensory support book series on Amazon, bookshop.org, and Barnes & Noble's website.
Oh, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for sharing. There are so many parents out there that are working through this and sometimes feel like they're working through it alone. So I so appreciate the work you do and for sharing it today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be on this platform, and I really hope I've benefited many parents.
You have. Thank you.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.